The last few films you made them from original scripts, as most of your films have been. This is an adaptation from a novel, which, in the hands of many filmmakers, is a recipe for a latke, for a potato pancake, a heavy film that's just an illustration. Do you approach adaptation? How did you approach the adaptation of Russell Banks's novel Foregone?
Pretty much the same way I've done a few other novels, which is that you simply, after you read the book once, then you read it again, and you list on a legal pad every single thing that happens in the novel. It could be 150 things happen in the novel. And then you put checks next to them. Which ones really are really cool? Which ones are funny? Which ones are necessary for exposition? Which ones are really meaningful, poignant? And then you start looking at all your checks. So now you've got 150 scenes and maybe 30, 40 scenes have checks, more than one check. You just 1, 2, 3 checks. So you say, okay, so I've got around 50 scenes now that I really like. Let's take it down some more. And I get it down to about 30. Because, okay, I have 30 great scenes now. I have 30 great scenes. What do I need to add to make this, to fill this up? And because I can't just do the 30 great scenes. I have to fill it up so that I can go to the scenes that are of lesser interest to me or are of kind of expositional need, But I just do, that's how I attack a novel, how I attack this novel too. And because you have to find yourself in the novel. Your job is not to rewrite the novel. It's already written. Your job is to reconceive it. And there's only one way you can properly reconceive it, as something that you own, that the Russell Banks doesn't own, or Philip Roth doesn't own, or Dostoevsky doesn't own. So where's my movie? Where's my movie inside this Kazantzakis novel? So you have to find it, and then that's the one you write. And sometimes, like Last Temptation of Christ, I when I read the book, I thought there was probably 5 or 6 scripts in this book, but there was only one that I owned. And that was the one, I had to figure out where's my script inside the Kazantzakis book.
I'd say there's more than one script in Foregone too, right? I mean, if has anybody read the novel? Right? Essentially, had you adapted other parts of the book, you would have done your own version of A Complete Unknown.
Yeah, well, there's a Foregone by Russell, who was a friend, a good friend. After Affliction, we became good friends, and I spent a week with him every summer up in Keene Valley. And then a year and a half ago, he told me I couldn't come up this summer because he had cancer and he was undergoing chemo. But he had written a book about dying, the death process, while he was healthy. He called it My Ivan Ilyich. And so I thought, I better read this book. And I was thinking of doing something else. I said, no, it's time. It's time to do a death movie. And so I decided to adapt it and make it my Ivan Ilyich. And fortunately for me, Russell was still alive through the whole writing process. He died about a week after I finished the script. So we were able to go back and forth with the script and talk about it. And I asked him certain things in the book I didn't understand, and certain things I thought were kind of cliched, and we talked back and forth. And he was a good friend, so it was in a sense a collaboration.
But one of the things that's fascinating about what you did with this novel, beside thinning it out a great deal, like just kind of the texture of the film is drastically different from the texture of the novel.
Well, Richard, that's because the novel is a mosaic. And literature offers you very few possibilities as a mosaic. What can you do? Change the font size, change the fonts, do all capitals, do italics. That's about it. Whereas in film, we have so many other opportunities. Change the screen ratio, change the nature of the color, change the nature of the black and white, change the aging of the film. You have so many ways you can manipulate film in a way that a novelist can't. So that to do a film mosaic is much more exciting because you can't really do a literary novel mosaic. So the previous mosaic I did was with Mishima, where you do some scenes as theatrical sets, you do some scenes as cinema verite, and you do some other scenes as old-fashioned Naruse kind of scenes. And so we can do this in cinema, but it's tough to do in a novel.
Do you find it liberating to be working more independently now, as you have been doing in the last decade or so?
That's an understatement. I came up in the studio system, and I never really thought too much about the whole Final Cut thing because the people who ran the studios liked movies. They went to movies. And they had opinions about movies, and sometimes the movies got a little better, sometimes they got a little worse, but then basically they were on your side. And that was the era of the studios, and then we entered into the era of independent cinema, and then we entered into the era of venture capital cinema, where you suddenly are having your films financed by people who actually don't go to movies that much and who are not crazy about movies. And I did a film where one point where one of the financiers said to me, did a film with Nick Cage and I was not happy with it. I said, I want to reshoot. And he said, you gave us a Nick Cage film on budget at 110 minutes. We are going to get a 17% return on our investment because of that. Why should we let you reshoot? And their logic was irrefutable. They're not going to get 20%. If they let me reshoot, they're probably going to get 11%. So once I realized I was dealing with this crowd, and at around the same time, Bret Easton Ellis and I self-financed this film, Canyons, and because I said to Bret, the movie business is changing like crazy. And I think it's possible now to do a DIY. I think you and I, Bret, you write a script, I'll direct it, we'll finance it. I think we can actually make a film. And so we did Canyons as kind of a dare, a test. Is this possible? Could you pull this off? Go to Kickstarter, raise a little money. And, we got the film made for around $300,000, and we sold it for around $1 million. And I thought, wow, 13 days? I said, this is a new world. The rules have changed, and they have changed in my favor because you can now navigate this terrain. You don't, it's possible. So once I'd gotten Final Cut, then I realized there were scripts I I was afraid to write for years. I was afraid to write First Reformed because I knew it would not sell, and I knew I had written a book on Bresson. I knew it would be stymied. It would be called a Bresson film, and it would be a flop, and it would have hurt my commercial prospects. So I never wrote that script. But now, with digital, Final Cut, I said I can finally write that script, and that was First Reformed. So that's what changed it.
But with O Canada, you were to my way of thinking, in a somewhat more difficult situation, because unlike First Reformed, Master Gardener, and The Card Counter, here you're making a period, 50, 60, 70% a period piece. So you essentially have to do a historical reconstruction on an unusually low budget, which I think you did remarkably. Was that a particular challenge?
Yes, but I mean, I didn't do it remarkably. If you watched the Dylan movie, what's it called?
Yeah, Complete Unknown.
Complete Unknown. Now, there's what you can do if you have enough money to really create positively 4th Street. I didn't have that much money, but then, so it wasn't. I wish I had the money that Mangold had for that film, because I would have loved to throw it on the screen, but I didn't. But we got away with it.
You more than got away with it. I think there's actually a whole genre of low-budget period reconstructions, like The Featherweight, for instance, which I thought was done really well this year, or Compensations, Irene Davis's films. Like there's an entire subgenre of films that do what you did extremely well. One of the things I especially enjoyed in O Canada, but in all of your recent films, but it really struck me in O Canada, is the style of acting. It's almost like there's a sort of an upper and a lower bound in the performances, like never too theatrical, never too underplayed. It's kind of very straightforward and a little bit contained. Was that an intentional choice?
Yeah, I mean, I was with Gere at an awards function where Ethan Hawke was getting an award for First Reformed. And Richard leaned over to me and he said, "How did you get him to do so little?" Because Ethan also has a propensity to overact. And so, I laughed. Time went by, and then I wrote this script. I thought, I think this would be interesting for Richard, because he's never played anybody who's dying. Anthony Hopkins, Jonathan Pryce, Tommy Lee Jones. You've seen them die, but you've never seen Richard old. So that would be an interesting challenge for him. I think he will rise to the challenge. So I proposed it to him, and he did rise to the challenge. And then I reminded him, I said, "You remember when you said that to me about Ethan Hawke?" I said, "Well, you're going to find out now. This is why. This is how I get you to do so little." And he had, over the years, developed a whole series of mannerisms. There were some in the neck, some in the eyebrows, some in the shoulder, in the hips, balls of the feet. I know because I gave him some of them originally. When we did American Gigolo, I showed him Purple Noon, Le Plain Soleil. I said, "Look at this guy, Alain Delon. Look how he walks. Look how he walks on the balls of his feet. Look how high he holds his hips. He knows. He knows when he enters the room is a better place." And Richard adopted that walk for American Gigolo. And then he adopted for the next film, and the next film, and the next film. It sort of became the Richard Gere walk. And so I had to, in a way, kind of knock some of those mannerisms out of him. But he understood exactly, because we had this conversation. And you have a code word when you're shooting, because you don't want to embarrass an actor on the set. And in the code word, it said, "Richard, let's do it again, take it inside." And as soon as I said take it inside, he knew what it meant. Don't do anything with facial muscles, his hand muscles, Just do it with his voice and his lungs.
And did you have to do similar work with that, with the rest of the cast members, or was it primarily Richard Gere who had the mannerisms he wanted to restrain?
Well, I mean, I had a very talented cast, and I once said to Anthony Perkins, I used to know. I said, I think acting is 75% casting. And Tony said, no, you're wrong. It's 90%. So that if you cast the right person at the right time of their life in a good role and they fuck it up, it's your fault. It's not theirs. And so I had, talented actors. I had good roles. And my only job was to keep them from fucking it up and let them be good in the way they can be, and not tease them because they're actors. Okay, actors like to act, and not to tease them and say, "Oh, act some more. Show me some more acting." No. Resist that. Swallow that.
The correspondence between Jacob Elordi and Richard Gere is kind of remarkable. He actually kind of seems like him in a certain way, younger.
Well, that was. I'll tell you a funny story. I told it before, but it's a good story, so I'll tell it again. I was trying to figure out how to cast this. Now, Bret Easton Ellis is a friend. I was having dinner with Bret in L.A., and I said, I'm trying to cast a young Richard Gere. Bret has a hang-up about American Gigolo. It was his coming-out film. He's written about it. It's in his books, blah, blah, blah. So Bret said to me, you're not going to cast. You're not going to find a young Richard Gere. There is no young Richard Gere. You're not going to find him. I said, yeah, I know. But, I just did a Zoom of this young actor, and I thought he was very interesting. His name was Jacob Elordi. And Bret went like this. Stop right there. I just came in my pants. So then I knew I had the right guy.
When I first saw Oh Canada, one of the great things about a Q&A after a screening is we don't have to worry about spoilers. Everybody's seen the movie. I was kind of stunned by one particular thing, which I then, of course, discovered was in the novel. And yet, when I saw it in the movie, when you talked about wanting to find your own thing, your own thematic connections to the book, in some weird way, it struck me as very personal, even though I have no rational reason to believe that's the case. Namely, the confession of what the great failure in Leo's life was, namely that he did not do military service.
Well, that is a generational thing. How old are you?
66. So I missed
You
the
missed
draft
it.
by a few years.
There was a 2-year period where the draft was enacted, and every young American male had to make a decision. Do I go to Vietnam, like Oliver Stone, and come back with an Oscar? Do I go to jail, like James Fonda's husband? Do I go to Canada? Do I become a conscientious objector? I'm a good college friend who went to Netherlands as a conscientious objector. So you had to make a choice. That was a kind of life-defining moment, which young people today don't really understand. They don't understand you are drafted, they have a lottery, and you have a number. And if you have a high number, you're going to go to Vietnam. What are you going to do? In my particular case, I was asthmatic, and my parents were pro-government, pro-war, everything. Christian, good Christian people. And my mother took me to the bus to go to the draft test in Detroit to have my physical. And she gave me a bag, a paper bag, and she said, "Now you take this with you. And when you go to sleep tonight, you put it under your pillow." Okay. I get in the bus heads for Detroit. It's full of ragweed, which I am intensely allergic to. So I did like my mother told me. I put it under my pillow. And the next morning when I had my physical, I was in the middle of an asthma attack. And of course, I was rejected. And I went back home, and both my parents sort of said, "Oh, it's too bad they turned you down." You know? Yeah, I said, yeah, I really wanted to go too. Yeah. But obviously my mama had sat my father down and said, "Okay, Charles, this is how it's going to work."
What did you think?
What?
What did you think personally? What, do you mind if I ask what you would have done?
If I hadn't failed, my brother went to Japan. He went to Kyoto as a missionary because we were church people, so you could always get a 1D. That's a divinity deferment. And so when he was going to go to Vietnam, he went to the church board and said, I feel the call. He went over to Kyoto and taught at Doshisha, which is a Christian university there. So I always knew that there was a fallback position in my church, is I could go to the church and say, "Send me to the missions." Because in my brother's case, there were two missions available. One was in Tehran and one was in Kyoto. They literally flipped a coin. One kid went to Tehran, the other kid went to Kyoto. Out of such things, our lives are made. So that would probably have been my fallback position, is to become a missionary. Better that than, a war criminal.
So you were, I mean, you are a film critic. You even if you don't carry the laminated card anymore, and even if you don't write as much as I wish you would. When you make a film, is the critical engine going? Are you thinking history of cinema, homage, references?
Oh yeah, you spot them all over the place, particularly certain films that are full of them. You could say boom, 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 boom. You spot all the references. I occasionally write on Facebook, not because it's just I have this old itch, this 50-year-old itch as a critic. And occasionally this itch gets so strong I just have to scratch. And so Facebook, perfect, you can scratch that itch because you don't have to pass judgment on a film. You can just say, it's an interesting film. I like my first film. I recommend you see it. Or here's an interesting film. And the critics are missing something really fascinating about this film. And so I want to point it out that I've read about a half dozen reviews of this film, and nobody's caught on to this particular aspect of it. So that gives me a chance to, play critic again. I would love to still write criticism, but you cannot make films and write criticism at the same time because of the egos of the people involved. So if I say the best performance Dustin Hoffman has given in 10 years, Dustin does not take that as a compliment. So, and you as a critic, you think I'm giving Dustin this big compliment.
Right, and you can't say something negative about somebody, and then you want to work with them subsequently.
No.
It's big trouble.
And you never know who knows anybody and what the connections are, and so you just unless you really dislike somebody so much that you don't care. And I have this problem with Joaquin Phoenix. I finally just said, I cannot stand Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know why anybody casts him. But you only go to that place when you're pushed in extremis.
When you since the New Yorker connection, you knew Pauline Kael. Pauline Kael was your first introduction to the world of film criticism. Is that right?
Yeah, because we didn't see movies in my church; they were forbidden. So I never saw movies. No, I didn't know anybody who saw movies. This was the synodical decree of 1928 against worldly amusements, the height of the jazz age, and theater attendance, movies, smoking, drinking, etc., dancing, all forbidden. And that's how I was raised. And it wasn't bad anyway. I mean, we didn't watch television, but we talked. And believe me, it's much more interesting to sit around a table and hear stories than to watch, Have Gun Will Travel. And so every Sunday at my grandmother's house, all the uncles got together and they told the stories for the week. They were all farmers. And they had all these great stories about hunting and this and somebody. And I love that tradition. And so that was the tradition I was raised with. And then movies came along, and they were forbidden. And it was a very easy way to be a rebel. Other kids, you have to hold somebody up, you have to go to jail, you have to beat somebody up. All I had to do to be a rebel was see a movie. But then that was the 1960s. And so I came to movies in probably the singular best decade of film history, which was the European cinema of the 60s. And so I walked in the door when the best music was playing. And you never forget the music that's playing when you first fall in love. And I fell in love with the European cinema of the 60s. And so that informed me from that point on. And so that I came to movies as an adult. And most of my friends, Stephen, George, Marty, whomever, Brian, they came to movies as kids. And it's a different experience coming to movies as an adult than coming in as a kid.
Was there something that flipped the switch? Did you know as soon as you started seeing movies that you wanted to make them, or was there something that flipped the switch after you'd already started watching them and writing about them or thinking critically about them?
Well, they were forbidden I went to Calvin College Seminary, Calvinist school, and the movies were forbidden. So I started a Sub Rosa Film Society. And that was basically the jazz catalog. You're showing the Antonioni stuff, showing Ordet. You're showing all these films. Because in order to get away with screening the films at the college, I would get one professor and one minister to appear after the film to discuss it. So, you show Ordet or Country Priest, whatever. Then afterward, Len Sweetman, who's a minister, and Nick Waltersdorf, who's a professor of philosophy, they come up. Now, this is bona fide, college education stuff. And they talk about it in those terms. So I had to get films that had true substance to them. Otherwise, I couldn't get the ministers and the professors to come up afterward and talk about it in a serious way because they didn't regard movies as high art anyway. So I was always picking the highest fruit there was and getting the smartest people I knew. And out of that, I was able to get a film society going. Now, it was illegal, but they didn't stop me because I had so many valid people. And we were charging 50 cents. And all this money, there's no place to go with this money. It all went right to me. Because I wasn't supposed to be doing this, so where do I put all this money? Well, I put it in my pocket. And so then at the end of 1 year of this, they said, okay, we will allow there to be a Calvin Film Society. You can program films, because they were clearly upset that they weren't getting a cut. And there's only one condition, is that you cannot be involved. And I said, that's fair enough, fair enough. I'm happy not to be involved. I'll move on. I'm headed for the college newspaper anyway. That's where I'd rather be in the college newspaper. I could make more trouble over there. And so that was how I got involved in movies.
One of the things that struck me about O Canada is, it's the closest thing you've done to, 2 Weeks in Another Town or Day for Night. It's your movie about movie making.
I wouldn't have chose that. Russell, who is a novelist, made it about a filmmaker because he didn't want it to be too close to himself. This is what we do as artists. You put a little bit of distance between you and the material. So if I had made this of a whole cloth, it would not have been about a filmmaker. It would have been about a painter. It would have been about an architect. It would have been a different kind of artist. But since I was adapting Russell's book and he had written about a filmmaker, I sort of bit the bullet and said, okay, I'll make it about a filmmaker. But I wouldn't do that spontaneously.
So you've never actually been tempted to make a movie about filmmaking, about a filmmaker in or out of the industry?
No, not at all. I mean, that's the opposite, Richard. The opposite of temptation is an abhorrence of doing that. I've done 2 films that are quasi-autobiographical, one about my father, one about my mother. They're 2 of the worst. The better the metaphor, the little further away from you, the better it is. And put some distance there. Like a poker player, a gardener. And so I wouldn't want to make a film about anything that close to me, because I think it would be bad. Because I realize that the closer it is to me, the less I understand it and the less I see it as a metaphor. Like the metaphor in this film is Canada. Canada is the metaphor for irresponsibility, cowardice, and death. It's a great way to use Canada. I don't think anybody's used Canada that way before.
I think we're out of time. It would be death being the last word. Thank you so much.